Welcome to the Kadao Woman podcast, where we amplify the voices of inspiring African women making waves across the globe. I'm your host, Lola Sheba Harris. If you're new here, make sure to follow the podcast so you do not miss an episode. And if you love what you hear, please be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps more people discover these amazing stories. So today we're diving into the magical world of storytelling with Leine Marie Akanza, a passionate educator and award-winning bilingual children's book author on a mission to use African folktales to help diversify bookshelves and curriculums. From her journey of turning a 5-year writing struggle into a published book to her insights on the importance of representation in children's literature, Leine's story is one of creativity, perseverance, and cultural pride. So get ready to be inspired as we explore how Leine balances her roles as a teacher by day and a storyteller by night, and learn why she believes that every story, no matter how small, has the power to change lives. Listen in on my conversation with Leine, and for the aspiring writer, this episode is especially for you. Good morning, Leine.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I am good. I'm fine. It's Saturday, and here in the UK, we have something called half term. So that means I have a week off of work. So that's brilliant.
You sound excited. So I guess I'm sure everybody's already wondering, what does she do? So we'll get to that in a second. I know you as a podcaster. I know you as a children's author. I know you as an amazing teacher. But I want you to introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and what you do,
Okay, sounds good. So I'm Leine Marie. I am a teacher by day, as I say, and a storyteller by night. So I work with children. I've worked with children since I was 16, but I've worked in education for the last 10 years, both primary and secondary. Right now I'm teaching French, but I've been known to do other things in school. So that's my day job. I love my day job. I trained as a creative and media writer at university, and then went back to university to retrain as a teacher. So I love my job. I love the kids that I work with. I love what we do. It's not perfect, but to see them start, and then when they leave, you see the maturity, the things they've learned, and you know that you've had something to do with it. That's very fulfilling. So that's what I do during the day, and then at night I take off my teacher hat, and then I put on my storytelling hat. So I'm a storyteller. I'm getting more and more comfortable with calling myself that. I've always loved stories. I've always read. I usually say I grew up with my mom, and my mother is not a reader, but she always invested in books because she knew that was what I did. I escaped in books for hours. I didn't come out of my room. Sometimes it was issues. If you're a reader, you know what I'm talking about. You just zone out. And so I've always been into that. And my passion is to tell stories, because they impacted me so much that now I just love telling stories, the way that I imagine them, and so I write my own stories, but I also retell African folks, myths, and legends. And so I retell them in a way that's a little bit more accessible, and a little bit more interesting. Sometimes I add my own flavor to it and things. My aim is to, write books and ebooks and put it out there for people to have access to these stories. But I found that at the moment, it's a little bit easier to just have a podcast and tell those stories on the podcast, only because it's easier to get it out like every other week or every month, whereas a book, it takes a little bit more. I'm still a writer, I still write, but right now I tell stories on my podcast. So that's me in a nutshell.
So a couple of things to unpack there, and thank you for sharing that. So you talked about, it sounds like your mom was obviously influenced what happened with you reading, and so I guess we'll just start from there. Your mom influenced you reading, and of course that just planted the seeds from when you were a kid. And then you talked about being a teacher, and of course then you become a storyteller at night, so you're switching gears. And so the first thing I'm curious to know is, what made you become that storyteller? Because you're already working with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And most teachers are like, okay, like you even started out saying, I have a half term, they need a break, right? And so it's like going back into the storytelling. And we didn't talk about what kind of books you write. Well, you said, I mean, yeah, who your target audience is. So what made you become a storyteller?
It's one of those very never-ending, winding roads. Some people say, I've always known I wanted to be this from the age of 2. That's not my story. So I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist, and I said, if I can't be a journalist, then I want to work with people who create documentaries. That was my passion. I loved learning things. I love finding out about things, not just culture, but also nature. That is something that I really like. And I find that myths and legends are a special way of looking into the human psyche. People create gods and deities out of what they believe the world and the natural world and the unseen world is about. They create stories to kind of give a reason for certain things. And I just love it. I love finding out, why people created this and why people think that. And so I love this naturally. Also, working with children, I have found that stories are a great way to teach. And I'm sure you know that, being a mom and things. So I started working with kids and realized, okay, it's best for me to anchor certain things in their mind if I use stories. So I explain certain facts, I explain certain things using stories. And at some point, I wanted to share certain morals and certain values, but I wanted to use stories. And I thought to myself, if I were to ever write a book, I would do it, to tell, to share morals and to share values. That was the beginning of my mindset of, okay, I might be able to do this. When I came out of university, actually even before, when I was at university, I started doing something called spoken word, and I became very good at it. I would write poetry and then recite it, and I loved it. I loved being on stage and doing those, one woman acts, and then get the applause at the end. Oh, I loved it. No humble pie here. I loved it. And because I loved it, I became better and better at it. So I became good at telling stories. And I used that when I was in the classroom. I used, the theatrics and all of that. So that plus my desire to pass on moral values and things like this made me think, okay, let me go into stories that are easy to how do I say it, to read with a lot of passion and different voices. And myths, legends, and folktales lend themselves to that so easily. You've got Nancy, you've got Ijapa, you've got so many different characters that you can change the voice for, and you can be really dramatic. And so I thought, oh, this is a nice format, and obviously being of African descent, I was like, well, if I'm going to use myths and legends and folk tales, let me use my own, let me create mine in the genre that I grew up with, or let me retell stories that I grew up with. So when I say it's a very winding road, that's what I mean. It's just so many little things that contributed to me writing my first book, which is a folk tale, Giraffe's Eggs, and also telling stories on my podcast, Giraffe's Eggs and Other African Folktales, in that genre. So yeah, it didn't start at the age of 2, but I hope that makes sense.
Oh no, it makes a lot of sense, and and I appreciate you going through that connective tissue, actually, of how you became a storyteller, and what led you to become a storyteller, why you chose the genre to specialize in. And so I don't think we talked about why you became a teacher, though, because you talked about wanting to be a journalist, obviously going to school for media, and you ended up pouring into children, because I'm a mom, so that's what teachers do. They pour into children. It is it's a thankless, selfless job. And so I'm curious about how you made that switch.
Okay, so as I said, I've always worked with children. My mother has a charity. She works mostly in Cote d'Ivoire now, Ivory Coast, but she also has a branch here, and she started here in the UK, where she noticed that the children because we lived on a council estate, so I'm not sure, they're affordable housing basically, and flats. So we lived there, and she noticed that a lot of children during the summer didn't go anywhere, and then they would just hang out, and then that's where they get picked up by dubious older people. The best way to put it. And it broke her heart. She was like, it probably is because the parents don't have the money to send them on holiday or to go to do anything because they have to work. So she was like, right, I'm gonna set up some kind of activity club. My mother is I have an idea, I do it kind of woman. So she did. She set it up. She put her own money into it. She hired vans and things like this. And she asked parents for permission. She looked at the law, what it is, what she has to sign, what she has to created a NGO. And then every Saturday, and I was the eldest in there, but by a lot. The oldest at the time was probably 9 or 10, and I was 16. So I was older by a lot. So I was basically a play worker working with mom and these kids. We did activities, we taught them a lot of things. I came from a Christian background, so a few verses and things like that. So I've always worked with children through that. So when I came out of university, my first job was an unpaid job, because I was like, okay, I need I need some experience. It's not easy to just say, oh, I'm a journalist, hire me. So I worked for a charity for a while, and then I looked for places and placements. And there were two things working against me. Number one, my confidence levels were very low. So I didn't know how to sell myself. And I was very young. So being able to put myself out there as a freelance journalist or anything like that, I couldn't. So I was like, okay, let me carry on doing this kind of volunteering and build up my portfolio or build up myself, but also find a job on the side. And I found a job in a school as we call them dinner ladies. They don't serve dinner. It's just at lunchtime, we're out there making sure that the children are safe. If there's any first aid that needs to be done, we do that. Any incident, we record it and just be there with the kids. It was in a primary school. And so, yeah, I was like, fine, it's just 1 hour at lunchtime. I do it, I come back, I've got a bit of money, and then I carry on with my volunteering. And I was very good at it. I was very good at it. I loved, that playtime with the kids, so much so that the head teacher said, you know what, Leine, we are short of a teaching assistant in the classroom. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a lot more time, but it's more money. So I went into it. And again, I was very good at it, the building the rapport with the children, breaking things down for the ones who struggle a little bit to catch up with the rest of the class. I was really good at it, and I knew the kids already. So they knew me, they liked me, and so they listened. And it made the teacher's job a lot easier to not have to deal with people, having breakdowns and, tantrums and all of that in the classroom. And through that, there were other opportunities. There was a breakfast and an after school club. They asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was like, yeah. And the more I took on more responsibilities and more jobs, the less I worked on, building my journalist career. And at some point, the head teacher said, Leine, the government wants us to teach French to the children, and you already speak French, you're great with the kids. I would really love for you to be an unqualified teacher, teach French to all the different classes. And I was like, oh my God, me? So I did it. I loved it, planning my lessons, giving them, I really felt like a teacher, giving them little worksheets that I created and then taking it in and marking it with a passion. Oh, if I knew then that I would do this and hate it. But anyway, no, I took it to heart, and I would spend like 15-20 minutes teaching, each class every day. And then I remember the deputy head teacher. She was a Nigerian lady, and she was kind of like my mentor in school. And she was like, Leine, I see you and you take on all these opportunities, and this is good, this is, and she would really train me, like, don't do this, say this, do that, don't have that mentality. She really did a work on me. And at some point she was like, okay, you need to go back to university and train as a teacher. And here I am thinking, oh my gosh, I've already done 3 years and blah, blah. I can't study anymore. I'm too old for this. I'm 23. She's looking at me like, really? And she knew my mom. So there was no way I could get away with it. So she called my mom. She's like, your kid needs to go back to university. Mom called me, and I was like, okay, fine. So I went back, trained as a French teacher, and here I am.
Wow.
I know.
Wow. So obviously she knew your mom, and that was everyone should just grab. She knew your mom.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that was it. You were back in school, and then and so you obviously got certified.
But
That is,
I'm grateful for her, because sometimes you need a kick up the backside, isn't it?
yeah, no, that's amazing though. That's amazing. And what I got from that was that you're a person who just pours herself into it.
Mm.
So first you thought you were going to pour yourself into the volunteering, and then you go, of course, you're going to do the journalism. You had a plan,
Mm-hmm.
and then you started teaching with, started working with kids as a dinner lady, which I've never heard that term before, so that was new. I was like, dinner lady, but that's not boring. So I'm glad you actually explained it.
Yeah, no,
And of course, you carried over this experience with working with your mom with children over, and you were smart enough to recognize there's something here that I'm doing organically, naturally, and just given. I love that part of your story. And I think, of course, it makes sense that at night you become a storyteller. And of course, your target is children. And so, segueing from that, you've obviously written a book called
yeah.
Giraffes and Eggs.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to tell us about that experience. Why giraffes and eggs? How you got to writing? That's a different
Yeah.
skill set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I said before, I did do quite a bit of poetry and spoken word. So I did write. And I did English. And at university we did creative and media writing. So part of it was creative writing. So I did have skill and I did have talent. And when I was working in the primary school, doing all this, extra work here and there, that's where the idea for writing a children's book to pass on morals and values came up. But it took me 5 years to get the book written. The majority of the time, it wasn't that I couldn't write the story. It was I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it just never was enough. It was never, the story always lacked something. So I would start and I would stop and I would start and I would stop. So there was that. But as well as being a perfectionist, I also didn't have the confidence. I thought, okay, you're going to write the story, and then what? Because no publishing house out there is going to take your book. Who are you? I really, man, my self-esteem was not the highest. And so yeah, for 5 years I was in and out, in and out. And then I met a friend on Instagram. Actually, he was a published poet and I really liked his poetry. So we got to talking and chatting. And then he showed up at my place of worship because he was looking for a church. And then he was there, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're the guy from Instagram." He was like, "Oh my God, yeah." So we became really good friends. And then, through our conversations, he told me, "Oh, I have a publishing company." I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing, blah, blah." And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, I know, but you've been telling me that you're writing this book and stuff." And I was like, "Oh no." So he was like, "What I need you to do is to really think about where you're taking this story." And so I was like, okay, I'm going to polish the story. And then he sent me a competition by a very big publishing house here in the UK. And he's like, "Leine, this is great for you. I think you should go for it." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you should definitely send your story in." And I'll tell you later why he did this, because I told him, "Oh, they're not going to take me, blah, blah, blah." And so I was like, okay, fine. So I sent it. And then during the process, I was like, oh, answering the questions. Why did you write this story? What is special about this story? And I was like, this is actually a really good story. This is actually really good. So I'm sending it with that kind of, ooh, brilliant. And of course, they didn't take my story. Not every story has a happy ending. But after I sent it, I had realized that I wrote a story and it was really good. And it was good enough for me to even consider sending it. And I made it through the first round. I just didn't make it through the finals, but I made it through the first round. And so I told him about it, and he was like, "You see that feeling you have? You see how you feel right now? That is brilliant. I needed you to see how awesome it was. Otherwise, if you don't see it, there's nothing I can do. Even if this gets published, there's nothing, because you're not going to back it." Oh, get it.
That's the
So
reason why.
honestly, that is he's brilliant. And so we worked together, and then he took on the story, sent it to an editor. I already had an illustrator and everything. And yeah, the story got published through his publishing house, House of Words Publishing. And yeah, Giraffe's Eggs was out and I was holding my book in my hand and I was like, wow, Giraffe's Eggs, that's my story, that's my book. I wrote this. So yeah, it's not been an easy journey getting into writing, but I had help. And also I all the little things that I picked up growing up, reading stories, writing poetry, reading stories to kids, all of that kind of mixed and mingled to make me a children's author.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I again, I'm hearing this, I'm pouring myself into it. I'm going to do this competition. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to answer all these questions. And in that process, you realize how good your story is. Love that. And that's obviously going to build your confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it sounds like even if you made it through first round, you weren't defeated. If anything,
Mm-hmm.
it propelled you forward. You wrote the book. You got it published. The book is in your hand. Do you remember that feeling?
I took a video because I knew that I needed to make that moment last forever. So it came through and I was like, I can't open it. Okay, open it. I can't open it. And I did very slowly and I took it out and then I had to pause the video, have a good cry,
Oh.
and then put a video back on and be like, oh my gosh, I've got it. The typical Instagram, whatever. But I had to cry first because I was like, this is 5 years in the making. And it was during a very difficult period of my personal life that this book came out. And so it was kind of like, despite everything, look, something beautiful came out, And so, yeah, now that feeling, oh my gosh. Is
Wow.
compared to it. Your first book is like your first child. It's like, wow, you love all your books, you love all your stories, but the first one, it opens the way.
Yeah, yeah, but it's also you recognizing that there is something to be said about you recognizing this is going to be a moment I want to I want to remember. And so you turned on the video.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, that is actually very smart. And then you cried, and that's because it was a journey. But that it really is what it is. It's a journey. And I love that you talked about the fact that it took you 5 years to just get it out. You knew you had the skills, but
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot to birth the gift,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
And also it takes people willing to believe in you. And I think if my friend hadn't, I mean, my mom was all like, yeah, you should do this. So was my sister when I told them the idea, and friends as well. But it takes somebody really pushing for it sometimes to help you see that, okay, I can do this. So for anybody who's listening, if you've achieved something great and awesome, one way that you can pass on the torch is by saying to someone, you can, and sometimes it has more weight because you've been there, done that. So yeah, sorry, I had to
no,
put
no,
that in there.
I appreciate you saying that, because that was actually going to be my next question, was if anyone was listening and they're like, I also want to be a writer, but I'm in this weird spot where I'm just it's a hump, and you
Mhm,
need to mentally get through it. Do you have any practical things that you did, even in the 5 years, even during that
mhm,
journey? Were there
mhm.
things you were doing just to even get the craft going?
Well, it was difficult because at first I couldn't settle on a story. I had so much to say. I had so much I wanted to write about. First, it was meant to be a rabbit, then it was going to be a fox. There were so many animals running through my head, and just so many storylines.
It was a
So,
zoo.
exactly, entirely, a whole zoo. So, I think for new writers, um, what I tell myself now is that this story is a great story. Doesn't have to be told now, though. I can keep it
Mm,
for later. Because otherwise you feel like, oh, but I really like this one, but I prefer this one, but I prefer this one. And that much choice can be overwhelming. So all the stories are great, brilliant. Start
mhm.
with one and then make sure that the others are written down so that you can come back to it. Whether you end up publishing them or not, that will be your choice. But don't feel like you have to do everything at once. I struggled with that. Once I had the one story, then it was a matter of actually getting the story there, but then reading it and reading it. And sometimes we get sick of reading our own thing, but you have to read it, leave it, go away, come back and read it again. And do you have the right feelings? Do you have, is that the right word? I once heard at university that with every novel you have to make sure every page is there for a reason. It's not just a gap filler. For every short story, it's every sentence. And then for every poem, it's every word. I'm using that word. Why am I using that word? And I kind of used that for this book. I was like, every sentence, why is it there? What am I trying to say? Am I trying to fill up, and it still isn't perfect, but it's a way to make sure that your story has the standard that you like and that you love. You will hear a lot of writers say that you should get into a routine, every day at the same time, and it works for some people. For me, it doesn't work because my brain is
You had a
just
zoo.
exactly. So I had to write when I had the writing energy. And I think that's why it took me so long, because sometimes I would be in that place where so much, and I write and I write and I write, and I can be writing for hours, and I'm in that zone and I'm loving it, and I'm redrafting and I'm crafting this, and I'm looking at this bird or this elephant or whatever. And then I have times where I'm just not emotionally in the right place, or mentally, or even physically. I might be tired, I might
Mm-hmm.
be unwell. And so I didn't write then, you know. So it depends on your personality. Some people need that structure and that routine and that everyday. And some people need to recognize when they are in a creative mode and then use that, capitalize on that. So it does take a little bit of soul searching, what works best for you. But yeah, those would be my two advice for any writers. Number one, it's okay to not do everything at once. And then number two, you've got to just make sure that you are in the right place when you're doing your work.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that's a great advice. It's funny because I'm not a writer, but I've also heard the get yourself a routine. So it's refreshing to hear that, you know what, that doesn't work for everybody. It didn't work for me. I did what worked for me. And of course I still published. And then, if you're comfortable sharing, you talked about there was something going on as well when you're trying to get birth this. I call it birthing because it was the first one. Like you said, it was your baby. Birthing giraffe's eggs. The irony in that statement. I'm curious to know, and of course, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, but curious to know what else was going on, because you just said there was a lot you were going through. When you're writing the book, it took 5 years, but there's life happening.
I think it's because life was happening that I was able to get the book out, because I thought to myself, do you know what, life is short. Let me just, So I was going through a period of time where I was going through great changes. I went from being one person to being a completely different person because of external factors. And so it meant that I suddenly had a lot of time. Suddenly I had a lot of time. Suddenly I wasn't too sure what the next step was. I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with myself. And so I had that period of time, and I was like, okay, all of this is too much for me. But because it was pressure and pain at the same time, it made me very creative. And so I was like, okay, sit down and finish the book, and then contact your friends, see if it can finally come out. It's the same thing happened in 2020 with the pandemic. It was huge, it was frightening, it was scary, life was changing, don't know where you're going, same thing. And then I started the podcast. So I think I need huge changes for me to create something new and beautiful. I'm not asking for more. I've got enough, just in case someone's hearing me. But yeah, I think that helped push me forward. Otherwise, it might have taken a little bit longer to get the book out. There was no urgency. There was no change. There was no let's go. It was kind of like, yeah, routine, mundane. So yeah, but let's not ask for this in order to get creative.
We'll
No.
find other ways.
No.
And so you are obviously very passionate about your book. You're very passionate about telling stories. I also know that there was a time you actually had a 5-year-old girl who thought, do you want to share that story and how that also
Yeah.
influenced you?
So my same friend, the author, when I was laddie dying and taking my time with my story. We talked about that story for years, actually. Now looking back, oh my gosh, he had patience. And I remember him telling me once, how's the story going, how's the writing going? I think I was meant to be editing it and sending it back to him, and I was taking my sweet time. And I said, yeah, I'm doing it, don't worry. And he said, oh, I went to, I think it was Leeds or Liverpool. It was one of those cities that starts with an L. And he went to see his friend, and they had a little girl, his friends actually. And they had a little girl. She was a bit, I think 4 or 5. And, as you are, you greet a little child, a little girl, you say, hi, princess. You say that, don't you? And so he said that to her, and I don't know if she was offended or shocked or whatever, but she was kind of like taken aback, saying, I'm not a princess. So he's thinking, okay, this little 4-year-old is shocked that I called her princess. So he was quite curious to find out why. He's like, why aren't you a princess? And so she just very matter of fact, there was no self-pity or anything like that. It was just fact. I'm not a princess. I don't look like a princess. Princesses don't look like me. And so I think he knew where she was going with this, but he, pushed a bit more to find out. And I think the story was that she didn't look like a princess because she didn't have the right skin color, right hair, and the story. And it broke his heart. And then when he told me, it broke my heart. And so I made sure that to include a little black girl in my story. She's not a princess, but I was determined to have some kind of representation of a human being, not just the animals, not just the culture and the calabash and the plantain and whatever, and the nature, but also a human with braids, with dark skin. And yeah, that little girl stays with me. That little girl is always on my mind. When I'm writing my stories now, when I'm doing things now, I'm thinking of those little children. And I've heard from them sharing this story. I've heard so many parents tell me similar stories with their children. And so now I'm very conscious of the fact that these stories are not just stories. Just like they influenced me when I was growing up and I would lose myself and escape in those worlds, these kids have the opportunity to do that as well with my stories. So let me be very mindful of how I tell them.
Representation. I love
Yeah.
it.
100%.
And that is important, and that's part of what this podcast is supposed to be. It's more about just showing other people that look like us and doing amazing things with their lives and just giving us that courage to take a step. And so I appreciate you saying that, and I wanted you to share it because I knew there was some influence there as well. And so in terms of how you write, do you still deal with self-doubt?
Oh, I do. Self-doubt, imposter syndrome. I think because I teach, it's easy for me to share ideas and share concepts in ways that are easy for people to understand. And because of that, people assume that I've got it together, and I don't. I don't. I still feel like, who am I to tell those stories? Number one. Who am I to retell those ancient stories? Who am I to do any of the things that I do? And it's difficult, but sometimes I think to myself, feelings are feelings. They will always be there. I just need to stick to the logic. And the logic is these stories need to be told.
Yep.
And I'm good at telling them. So let me keep going.
And that's how you overcome it. You just pick yourself back up. Do you have any daily rituals that you do to reaffirm yourself and stay on mission, right? Is there anything specific you do? Or
No, and I wish I could say, I every day I have a gratitude journal. I'm not good at these things. And I don't know if it's because I don't know if it's because I'm a creative, but things differ for me. One season it will be a journey, journal rather. Sometimes it will be music or like so many different things. I know this week it's been I know, right? It's been more of a reflection kind of things. The day begins, and then I wake up really early. My body clock doesn't function properly. I only sleep for 5 hours, so I usually try
I
to
only
go.
sleep for 6 hours.
Oh, there we go.
I know exactly what you mean.
I
It's
found a
automatic.
twin.
Yes,
Yeah, my
yes.
body just So I try to be smart, because if I go to bed at 10, that's it. I'm gonna be waking up at 3 or something.
Yep, I know
So
exactly what you're talking about.
So I go to bed at midnight, wake up at 5, and I don't have to be up until 6. So for that hour, what I've done this week, and sometimes I do that, and just think through how I'm feeling, And it could be anything. It could be emotional, it could be as a writer, it could be my career, whatever, how I'm feeling. Try to identify anything that's kind of like a bit off, find out why, and ask myself some questions, and then try to do some problem solving on my own. And I really do enjoy it because there's no pressure, there's none of that. And I can get up feeling like, do you know what, this was good, let me work on this, let me talk to that person, let me make sure I get this done first. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. But different things work. Sometimes I screenshot messages that people send me, or tweets,
Mm.
or Instagram mentions that make me feel good. I mean, let me not lie. When people shout me out, I'm like, ooh, I'm special. So, take a picture of it. Sometimes I go through, I'm like, oh, look at that. Ooh.
Basically, your confidence boosters is what I'm hearing.
There we go. That's what I'll call them.
Yeah.
Nothing about pride. No. Confidence boosters. I like that.
Yeah. That's what that is. And sometimes you need that to keep going, because it is a journey. It's not overnight. And I guess clearly that excites you. And so I'm curious to know, of course, are you going to write more books?
So I'm in the process of writing right now. I'm working with a company called Kunda Kids. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it, but yeah, if I'm not, I'll let you know.
Yeah,
So
let
I'm
me know.
working with Kunda Kids, and they are exceptional at telling stories themselves, but also their passion is similar to my passion, which is amplify African children's authors, give them the platform and the space to be able to tell those stories that for a long time were not told by us. So when we say there are no books with African children in there, it's not entirely true, but those stories are not always a very good reflection of us. And sometimes we want to tell our own stories.
Mhm.
I remember reading a story not too long ago, and I was like, really? Where it was a story of a lady who went to a village, and I don't know what happened, but I think she gave something to some of the kids and they were fascinated by it. And it happened to be a mirror because apparently these children had never seen their reflection.
Mhm.
And I was like, really?
Wow.
Really? This is your story? And I was like, woman, we have mirrors. If
I know.
anything, at least we have rivers. We can see our faces in
Oh my God.
what are you talking about? I was like, oh my gosh, have I read this? And I was so outraged. I was like, no. These are not the stories I want my kids to read.
Oh my
Be
goodness.
embarrassed of back home. Like, you people don't even have a mirror. Like, you've never seen your face. You don't know what you look like. I'm like, gosh, no, these are not the stories I want to tell. So yeah, they've got the Kunda kids. They have the same mentality that we are the best at telling our stories, at tooting our own horn, at telling honest stories. Sometimes there will be sad stories, but also
Mhm.
telling stories that elevate us, not just the poor little African kid who goes to the village without shoes or something like that. So I'm working with them, and hopefully, get my next book out, and just from there carry on writing books, not just the podcast, carry on writing books. I think it's easier when you're working with people who are experts in their field to get
Yeah.
your story out, because then you don't have to wear every hat. I don't
Right.
have to both be the one seeking for an illustrator and finding an editor and looking for the marketing and the printing and everything. So it helps when you have a company that has been there, done that, is good at it, and has the passion that you have. It is perfect and excellent. Give me them over Penguin House any day.
No, that's amazing. And I think that's also something that any aspiring writer who's listening to you right now can also take into account. It's sometimes you need to outsource some of the parts
Mm,
that will be the obstacles in you getting the story out, right? Which is what I'm hearing. It's my job is to tell the story, and then I work with other people to get it out, or I mean to publish it, not necessarily get it out of you, but market it, like you said, do the illustration work, all the pieces of the puzzle
mhm.
can come from one source. Like I said, give it to the experts. And so I love that. Um, Before we segue into another section, any final advice or any best advice? What's your best advice for anyone listening to you today? What would you tell them? That one single thing you tell them.
I will tell them one trap I've fallen into is to be self-conscious about the front of house, the look of things, looking like a writer, etc., that I forgot to invest in actually being the writer, the back end of things. Developing your craft is reading a lot of books in your genre. It is writing rubbish stories and then throwing them, and then writing again and then throwing them, and being okay with not every book I write is going to be a story that is worth reading. But I at some point was so into taking the right author pictures, writing the right author bio, getting the website, and all of these things are not writing. It's not being an author. These are just to show that you are one. What are you doing yourself to make sure that your stories are worth telling, they are told well, that you're getting better? Who are you learning from? Who are you reading? How are you practicing? So yeah, that would be an advice, not to fall into that trap. It's easy to fall into the trap because Instagram and other social medias are so visual that you feel like you have to have those posts and those pictures and it has to be perfect. But there's a lot of not good people, not good books out there, not very good authors out there. And if you want to stand out and stand the test of time, you have to not only look the part but be the part. There are a lot of children's authors out there. There are many, a lot of them self-published, a lot of them published by publishing houses. What makes you stand out is not how pretty your pictures look and how many followers you have, but are your stories life-changing? Am I going to remember that story? Even if I'm 34, can I pick up this book about this little rat or this little chicken or this little girl or boy and think, oh, that was really good? If I, as an adult, don't like your story, what will make a child like this story? Children are not idiots. They still know what's nice and what's not nice. If your story is boring, they will switch off.
That is true. I have boys.
And they will not fake it.
Yes, they will not.
So focus on your craft. It is so much more important. So many opportunities will come. You will meet the right people. It's just the story is the most important. Your craft, develop yourself as a writer and storyteller.
I love that. And actually, I would even go a step further and say it's not just even that advice is actually not just applicable to writers. It's study your craft, like you said, and people will come. I think anyone listening can still take that nugget and apply that to whatever it is they're passionate about. And of course, you're a passionate storyteller. So definitely looking forward to more stories. Just one more question, actually. Is Giraffe Eggs targeted towards a certain age group?
It is. It's more for children from 4 to 8. But anybody can read it.
Okay, but so I'm gonna stay out on this podcast. Some of us would like more older now. We need more of those because I think you're doing amazing work, about especially with representation and reintroducing those African stories that we all grew up with, and so that work has to be done. And it sounds like you're going to help make that done. So I appreciate that about you. I'll say that. Yes, well, you will. We're going to get more confident boosters. How about that?
There we go.
And so now I want to segue into the lightning round, where I got to ask you a bunch of questions. And so there's no overthinking, but there is one first question that I need to get out the way, which is, where did you go to school?
Oh, I went on 2 different continents, 3 different countries. So my primary education was both in France and Côte d'Ivoire. Secondary education was both in Côte d'Ivoire and the UK, and further education was in the UK.
Okay. So did you go to boarding school in Côte d'Ivoire?
Oh, no, I didn't.
No.
My mother did, and I heard the horror stories, but no, I didn't.
And then do you guys have the thing where you guys, like back home in Nigeria, well, it's kind of sad actually to say this, but in Lagos, we all kind of know the schools. Like it's either you went to that school or you went to this school, and it's like a sense of pride. Does Côte d'Ivoire have the same thing? Like
we do. Obviously.
So what school did you rep then?
Sorry?
What school did you rep?
Oh gosh, I repped 2. So when my parents were all about, oh, she needs to continue her French-ish education, I went to André Malraux, posh school for posh kids. And then they realized that this money thing, let's make sure she has a good and decent education. So I went to CSP de Cocody. I liked both schools, but I think I like CSP more because the kids were a bit more down to earth there. They didn't have those huge mansions with 15 cars in front, and I just had a house and a car. So my heart goes out to CSP de Cocody, 100%.
Awesome. So anyone listening, there you go. She's repping that. All right. So now let's go into the question. So what's the last thing you learned? And it could be anything.
Oh gosh. No overthinking. Okay. I learned that. Oh my God, this is so hard. Okay, you're gonna have to make it more precise. What do you mean, like in life or as a skill? What do you mean?
Anything. It could be I learned how to bake a cake. I learned how to garden. It could be I learned how to edit my podcast, whatever it is.
Ooh, I learned how to create interactive PDFs. So you
Oh
get a
wow.
PDF that you can write on it. Yeah, I
Oh
learned how to do
cool.
that. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Love it. What is your greatest fear?
Um, mm, my greatest fear is to not have any agency over my life, not have any control, being told where to go, what to do, and not being able to make my own choices, whether it's from the government or the society I'm in or whatever, just not being able to be my creative self, my real self. Oh, yeah.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
I'm gonna say becoming a teacher.
Oh,
It wasn't the plan, and I had to go back to university for it, and it was tough, but I did it and I'm doing well at it. And it is a huge achievement to be in these kids' life and to be liked. I'm that that they like, and they walk past and like, that's my French teacher. Is that your French teacher? Oh, you're so lucky. Yep, yeah, that's me. I'm the one. So that's a huge achievement.
I love that. What matters most to you?
At the moment, it's just having the opportunity to try new things, do new things, not think of myself as too old to do this or feel like I'm behind because I don't have this. Just that peace, calm, live your life. Yeah, that matters to me. I need this.
Tell more stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your motto? What words do you live by?
I can't solve the problem, but I can be a part of the solution. I can't help everybody, but I can help somebody.
Ooh, I like that. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite quote?
I do have a favorite book, and it's a book called Stories from Africa. It's a book that I read when I first arrived to this country. I borrowed it from my secondary school and I never returned it. I'm sorry.
That I wasn't expecting that. Three words you would use to describe you, the Kadara woman.
What? One word?
Three. You got three.
Oh, three. Sorry.
Yeah.
Three. Oh gosh, even three words. Creative, reflective, and unique. Sounds so cliche, but yeah, you won't
No,
find another one like me.
there you go. It's not cliche. I love that. You will not find another one like you. Yes. And what are your thoughts on destiny?
I definitely think destiny is created. I don't think destiny is set in stone. I think maybe the direction could be determined by factors like your birth and all of that stuff, but you create your destiny. You keep creating it. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. So, where can listeners learn more about you and how can they connect with you?
So I think the best place would be for my website, because on there you have links to all the other things. So my website is lmdiane.com. And then from there, you can listen to the podcast, you can buy the book, you can have access to my social media, you can even send me a message, those confidence boosters. You can even record a voice message and send to me. So go for it. I want to hear your voice. So yeah, lmdiane.com.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Leine, I want to thank you so much for just spending time with us today. Love everything you shared and looking forward to the next book. And hopefully it'll be a one targeted towards my 10-year-old boy and 8-year-old boy. And so we're going to be very specific on what we're asking. I'm going to put that in the universe. And so just want to say thank you so much.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
Amazing. Leine shows us that every story counts. A true Kadara woman who's making a difference in the world through children's literature and African storytelling. From her story, I hope you've taken away the power of perseverance in pursuing your passions, even when a journey takes longer than expected. Remember, it took Leine 5 years to publish her first book, but that didn't stop her from achieving her dream. And since this recording, Leine went on to publish a second book. She's also married, but still publishes under her pen name L.M. Daney. She's also a fellow podcaster, and the link to her podcast will be in the show notes. Leine's commitment to showcasing African stories and characters is a powerful reminder of how important it is for children to see themselves reflected in the books they read. Lastly, Leine's balance of being a teacher by day and a storyteller by night shows us that it's possible to nurture multiple passions and make a difference in more ways than one. I really hope this episode has inspired you to embrace your own stories, whether you're telling them or living them. And as Leine said, you can't solve every problem, but you can be part of the solution. Thank you for tuning into the Kadara Woman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate, review, and reshare. Until next time, this is Lala with the Kadara Woman podcast, reminding you that your Kadara moment of clarity may have already happened, and all you need to do is embrace it. This podcast was created, produced, and recorded by Lala Shaber Harris and sound edited by Mo Isu. The Kadara Woman podcast is a production of Kadara Media.